I'm David Lombardo, and this is WCNY's The Capitol Press Room. We're turning our attention to southern Brooklyn, the site of one of the few competitive assembly races this fall, where incumbent Republican Alec Brooke Krasny, a former Democrat, is taking on Democrat Chris McCreight, a city council member staffer, who joins us on the show to talk about his latest bid to work in Albany. Welcome to the show, Chris.
Hi, David. Thanks for having me.
Well, prior to your run in 2024 for the Assembly, I read that you had flirted with some campaigns before, like in 2018. What is it about the Assembly that is appealing to you, that has prompted you to at least consider running multiple times?
That's a good question. And a lot of folks actually thought, that I might run for to replace Councilman Justin Brannan as being, since I was his chief of staff for 8 years. But I've always sort of been drawn to the Assembly in this area, mostly because I think for the longest time, especially on the Bay Ridge side of the district, there really hasn't been anybody who has called Bay Ridge home, who've been in the Assembly for almost over 42, 44 years. The neighborhood is cut up into 3 or 4 different assembly districts over the last 4 decades. And, you know, people have always known who their city council member is in this area, and they've always known who their state senator is in this area. And they have really not known much about their assembly member. In fact, when I go knocking on doors, people actually ask me straight up, I'm not very familiar with what the assembly does. What does an assembly member do? It's part of government that has sort of been lost in a good chunk of this district. And I felt like this is somewhere where I could actually really, really make a change here and really improve, not just the local neighborhoods that I represent, but also just New York City as a New York State as a whole.
Well, why do you think that lack of awareness about the assembly is pronounced in Bay Ridge? And is this a unique phenomenon? Because when I've heard people talk about New York City politics, they often say that the city council members get more attention than the
Sure.
state legislators. So maybe I would assume that type of lack of awareness is pretty common in New York City.
You would think so. You would think so. And there's probably something to the fact that a city council member is always going to be a little more known than a state senator or an assembly member. But there's really no reason that a state senator should be more known than an assembly member, especially given the size of a state senator's district. Assembly member's district is even smaller than a council member's district. So they should be able to really hone in and be known in their particular neighborhoods in those districts. In this district, it's an interesting district the way it's drawn. It's split in half by the Belt Parkway, so I think you have a lot of assembly members in the past who have more or less stayed on one side of that Belt Parkway and not the other. But right now you have Alec Brooke Krasny, who has a district office in Bay Ridge that doesn't even have a sign. There's literally no sign over his door saying this is his district, and that is that's a problem in the sense that people are unaware of him and the fact that there's an assembly office right there, right off Third Avenue in Bay Ridge. And I think that's by design. I don't think he wants to do the work. I don't think he wants people to come in and question his votes in Albany or ask him for help on the local level, partly because of some of his stances that he's taken when it comes to supporting, some of the craziest of the crazy and the worst of the worst we're getting out of the White House.
Well, let's talk more about the job of the assembly, because you've made the case to city and state that the incumbent in this case is not doing his job and therefore you needed to run again. Aside from maybe ideological differences, because one vote isn't necessarily going to swing the direction of the assembly chamber and its agenda, how would you approach this work of an assembly member differently?
Sure, sure. I tell this to voters all the time when I'm knocking on doors and things like that. Ideologically, obviously there are different. We have a lot of differences. We have a lot of differences on how we view what's going on in Washington, what's going on a local level, especially. But the biggest thing is that he's just absent when it comes to doing the job. He hasn't passed one bill in the last 4 years, and I know Republicans don't always get to pass as many bills as Democrats, but he's really not even advocating for legislation that has any chance of passing. He's introducing bills that are really there just to rile up the sort of Republican base, but they're not realistic bills. And like I said, he has an office that's just almost never open. It doesn't have a sign over the door. People aren't there. He's not there to help people, especially when it comes to issues that DC is throwing our way. People are losing health care. They're losing SNAP benefits. They're scared about immigration. And, you have an assembly member who not only supports all of these actions that are coming out of DC, but he's really not there to help people when they come in and say, I don't know how to fill out my SNAP benefits now that we have to do these work-related requirements. That is not ideological. That part of just doing the job and helping constituents is something that I want to step in and be able to do. It's one of the things that I really enjoyed working for Justin Brandon, those 8 years. Everybody knows that Justin and Kayla right now as well. They're very, very focused on constituent services and helping people whenever they have issues. Adding somebody who can actually and wants to help people, no matter who they are. He's often said that people know how to get him. They know where they have his cell phone number, which, your average person who needs help with SNAP benefits does not have the assembly member's cell phone number.
Well, before we move on, let me reintroduce you. For listeners just joining us, I'm David Lombardo, and this is WCNY's The Capitol Press Room, and we're speaking with Democrat Chris McCreight, who's running for a South Brooklyn Assembly seat currently held by incumbent Republican Alec Brooke Krasny, with this year's race representing a rematch of a narrowly contested 2024 election. So you faulted the incumbent for pushing bills that have no chance of passing. And looking at your campaign website, one of your big issues is property tax reform, and you plan to introduce legislation to address the property tax system for Southern Brooklyn homeowners and potentially lower property tax rates. As a freshman member, though, the idea of getting something that big through is hard to fathom. So what do you think you could do in that realm early on, or to build a coalition to get towards that idea of property tax relief, which is one complicated ball of wax to try to
Sure.
unpack?
Sure. Well, first off, it's not just important in terms of the unfairness that each neighborhood is not paying the same rates, which is something that we have here in Brooklyn. A $3 million house in Park Slope is paying about the same amount in property taxes as a $1 million house in Bay Ridge. And, I don't think there's anybody out there who's going to say that's fair. But you also have another class of properties, which are co-ops, which are paying almost twice as much, if sometimes 3 times as much in property taxes as a house on the same block. And that's because they're taxed at a different rate. We really need to have folks up in Albany who are really focused on this. I know I'm not the only one. I know there are a lot of folks, elected officials on the state Senate and the Assembly side, who do want to see this change, who do want to fix things. And I would be part of that coalition. It's something that, on day one, I'm going to be up there fighting for that, because it's fundamentally unfair, especially, when you start talking about somebody who owns a $400,000 co-op and they look across the street and they see this mansion that's paying about the same rate as them. And it's just not right. We shouldn't be balancing the budget on, middle class co-op owners and condo owners the way that the system is set up to do right now.
Well, where would you see yourself falling in the ideological spectrum of the Assembly Democratic Conference if you were to be elected? How would you describe sort of your ideology?
My ideology is, really neighborhood first. It's very practical, pragmatic, making sure that the needs of the neighborhoods, from Bay Ridge to Coney Island are taken into consideration. It goes way beyond things like property taxes. The Coney Island and Brighton Beach side of the district suffered enormously and are still suffering from the effects of Superstorm Sandy. You really don't hear other neighborhoods in New York City saying we're still suffering because of Sandy. And you have that problem in Coney Island and Brighton Beach. There are NYCHA buildings with community rooms that were rebuilt after Sandy that are not reopened yet. And things like that are just not acceptable. The funds to fix these things up should be there. And those aren't party Republican or Democratic, left or right. Those are just doing things for people because it's the right thing to do.
Although we do know that in Albany there is a certain amount of partisanship when it comes to the distribution of resources. So is there a case to be made that this district would be better served by having a majority representation, just because that increases their chances of bringing home the bacon, so to speak?
Absolutely. I mean, the current assembly member has brought $0 back to the district basically for the last 4 years. It's a real detriment to the neighborhood to have a do-nothing Republican who doesn't have any leverage in Albany.
Well, I want to come back to you and maybe your skill set or experiences. What is it about Chris McCreight and the background that you bring, or the expertise that you bring, that you're going to be focusing on during the home stretch of this run for the Assembly?
I think the two things in my background beyond the assembly time, one obviously working for the city council. I mean, the council district and the assembly district have a ton of overlap. The big two neighborhoods in the district that are, mostly in the assembly district are Bay Ridge and Coney Island. Those are both in the council district. So I have relationships with the principals in the schools. I have relationships with the police. I have relationships with just about every sort of stakeholder in the district already. So in terms of learning what needs to be done, who's who, and all that stuff, I'm ready to go on day one. But, the other thing that I think I can point back to is the fact that I was a small business owner. I owned a record store for 15 years. So I understand the struggles of small businesses. I understand the regulations and the bureaucracies and how hard that is for folks who don't speak English as a first language. When it comes to navigating all the different Department of Health, Department of Consumer Affairs, and all of that. Having an assembly member who can walk into a business and understands the plight and what we might be doing wrong and what we might not be getting right up in Albany when it comes to small businesses is important.
If you're elected, you're likely going to join an assembly chamber that has a more progressive makeup than it has in recent years. Do you think you're going to have to push back against that, or do you think the introduction of, say, new DSA members is going to be a positive for the chamber, and you're encouraged by that sort of direction of the chamber?
Labels are one thing. The issues that a lot of folks are talking about right now, I think, are the most important things, whether that's, bringing universal child care to the whole state. Healthcare costs is not something that I look at in a democratic ideological spectrum. I think everybody wants to see universal healthcare sooner than later. When it comes to taxes on billionaires and taxes on corporations, I get it. I think they can afford to pay a little more, and I think it's important to have a goal with what we're going to do with that money. And I think there's plenty of things that we can do with those increased taxes from billionaires and corporations.
Well, I can't let you go, though, without asking about Brooklyn politics, and specifically, who's going to be the next leader of the Brooklyn Dems, and is your former boss a realistic contender that we should be thinking about?
I was going to say it's not going to be me. I am a district leader, so I am in the process of that conversation. I think we're pretty early in the conversation. I don't know exactly where it's going to go. In order for Justin to become the party boss, which I think a lot of people would find very interesting, I would have to resign. But there's a lot of technicalities and Robert's Rules of Orders that would have to be followed and all that to make that happen. And it seems like that would be somewhat complicated, to be honest. But at the same time, I think everything's on the table right now. And I look forward to hopefully sometime in August or even late, because this sometimes breaks late, that we all kind of can come together so it's not one faction against the other faction, and that we can all unite behind somebody who is going to make sure that the Democratic Party is doing what the Democratic Party needs to be doing, which is first and foremost winning elections in November.
Well, what are the characteristics of a person who would represent sort of a unifying figure, given what sort of schism exists in the
Well, I think you
local
start
party?
there. You start at that last thing I said. You start at we need to beat Republicans. And then you go from there. How are you going to do that? How are you going to organize the party so that when, we have differences of opinion on judicial selections and things like that, you get past that and you're really still focused on that final goal, which is what we are organized as a party to do, which is to win elections.
Well, we've been speaking with Chris McCreight. He is a Democrat running for the Assembly in Southern Brooklyn. Chris, thank you so much for making the time. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, David. Have a good day.
Support for the Capitol Press Room comes from O'Donnell and Associates, a public affairs firm providing strategic guidance to businesses and nonprofits on navigating policy and regulatory issues. More information is available at o'donnellsolutions.com.